Hello, all the hundreds of viewers that we've amassed to date. So the numbers really do speak for themselves when it comes to this. I'm Darren Taggart. I'm joined today by the effervescent and bubbly personality that is Mr. Cheeky Vimto. Hello. Look at that smile.
What do you want to talk about, Mr. Dazzletag?
Let me tell you what I would like to talk about. I need to start off, as all good meetings do, with apologies and corrections. I haven't received any apologies from any invitees who couldn't make it, as I only invited you. But I do need to correct myself from the last time we spoke, when I stupidly... and more out of my own innocence of the type of chap he is than any sort of deliberate intent to deceive. But I said that at least Johan and Rats didn't advocate violence. He made his point and didn't advocate violence. And like all these things, you scratch the veneer and the truth comes tumbling out in all its Nazi-esque brilliance. And so we saw this appear on the old board earlier. I'll just share my screen to show you this. Quite a treat. And he's just lamenting the fact that they can't, that the final solution that rank amateur Hitler attempted, wasn't successful. So he's just musing over how to given that we're in full spiritual collapse, how do we achieve mass liquidation to get rid of the cockroaches, which I think is what the Nazis called, the undesirables that they put in gas ovens. And then you get the sort of German aspect, that sort of the tone that makes it sound correct,
Wouldn't it be good if we thought of like a pun, because like Nazi and rats, if we had like
the Ratzi party. He's leading the Ratzi party. But he does warn that it must be done in an orderly and efficient manner, however. And then finally sort of signs off with a fascist revolution then would have solved this when we had the law on our side. So I was quite, I stand corrected. He is, as well as a, psychopathic narcissist, he's also a deeply unpleasant excuse for a human being.
Someone's going to come along and say, well, probably not, because who the fuck watches this, but if someone did come along and say, oh, I'm sure he's just joking. I'm sure he's being ironic or something.
One, I don't think he could understand irony in a million years. He has a literalist brain. He doesn't have an ironic brain. And two, he's made it quite clear on many occasions that there are certain subjects about which you must not joke. So unless that was just hypocritical twaddle designed to back up his holier-than-thou demeanour, he must therefore have been serious. Because I'm sure it's not something many sane, normal people would joke about. And
Can I post this hangout in the group?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, I'm going to tell them not
Who else
to
is up?
come in and just stare blankly at the screen. And
That's true. That would be good this week. That would be lovely. I did also want to talk today because I heard something on a podcast, and I know we've discussed it before, but it'd be good to sort of explain things more clearly than we did last time concerning this belief that people have in an objective morality. covering the problem of evil and free will, because they seem to talk about it in those type of terms. Because, I mean, what would you say is the problem of evil? From your philosophical...
The problem with evil is a misleading title. It's really the problem of suffering.
The problem is... Well, is it? This is what I mean.
Well, I mean, when an atheist says that there are X, Y, and Z evil things happening, he's not committed to some metaphysical reality of evil. He's just saying that people are hurting, and that is bad for them.
Exactly, but there are, you know, and then what the religious, the sort of less sophisticated religious people will do is say, well, you can't, you know, without an objective morality, you can't justify it.
You can't criticize your framework from ours.
Yeah,
is what exactly. They're saying. Yeah, and that move doesn't work. I've spent infinity time refuting that, because that's a move. Like, you could answer the problem of evil. You could say, well, it's free will, it's this. But they just try and decimate the criticism. Just try and sort of like preemptively end the conversation, and it doesn't work, because you can just say, look, you believe in a God which is all good. You believe in horrendous amount of suffering, which is like sort of planned and executed by this deity because he has foreknowledge. You have a contradiction on your hands. So you can't reductio it, because it is itself a reductio of the theist position. And smart theists don't say this. There's videos of William Lane Craig sort of like using this argument in a debate and then backing down and saying, no, okay, you got me, it doesn't work. This evil proves God thing, and then going on to use it again after he'd sort of admitted on stage that it doesn't work. Like, so it's one of these arguments that makes me go, are apologists honest? Probably not.
Yeah, and I would agree with that, because the thing is, as with all a lot of their you don't want to call them arguments, but they call it arguments. So for the sake of argument, I'll call it, you know, for their argument.
I call them moves, because like,
yeah, I mean, it's more moves, I think, because what they do is they say, you know, when a normal human being says evil is all around, I agree that what they actually mean is suffering's all around. Now, to me, and the way that religious people talk about it, there is no link between suffering and sin. So that when there's, you know, there might be, if you had a Venn diagram of suffering and sin, yeah, there would only be a small amount of overlap between.
Yeah, because their ethics isn't based about harm and the well-being of people.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So when we say, oh, you know, there's evil in the world, children are being raped and sold into slavery, you know, which isn't a sin. You know, there's no major religion of the book, and I think even the most, you know, moderate and liberal of religious people would say that there's not a lot of evidence to say that raping small children and selling them into slavery might cause a tremendous amount of suffering, but it isn't a sin. Or at least there's no scriptural basis for
it. There's no scriptural basis for saying that. Yeah, I mean, the standard comeback to that is that it's an argument from silence, as though it's not legitimate to mention what God neglected to say when he wrote the Secrets of the Universe, volumes 1 and 2.
Exactly. He needed to tell people don't kill each other. He needed to tell people don't steal. You know, because they had a sense of property, but you know they still had to be told not to steal. But of course, nobody needs to be told not to rape children, apart from priests apparently, who have spent a long time sort of musing over whether or not it is in fact a sin. And that, you know, and variously blaming the children for having such tight bottoms and things like that, and seducing them from the path. It's an extreme example because we're often, whenever anybody criticizes the baseless assertion that morality is objective, they turn the meaning of objective round to mean absolute, which of course it doesn't. you know, oh, you don't think paedophilia is absolutely wrong? Unless you agree with me, you're a paedophile, which is their bait and switch that they try to
And,
do. So this isn't a straw man I'm picking at here.
no, I mean, people have done this. Like the Cartesian theist, that was his old channel, where he didn't have, he literally did not have other things to say other than sort of manipulative appeals to emotion to try and get you to affirm objective morality. And then probably the idea was, if I can get them to affirm objective morality, I can get them to with the moral argument for God. But like his sort of his method changed over time. Like at first he would say you can't have objective morality without God. But then it became just picking on anyone who didn't affirm objective morality and not really saying how God fell into that picture. Which I thought was interesting because it was like, okay, so when you're gonna, but like he never really got to do that because of dark antics.
Banking.
The moral arguments are really just like I'm waiting to see an actual argument, like an intrepid philosopher to sit down and try and do something with it. Because once you unpack it, it's so facile that it's like it's not persuasive to anyone.
Yeah, I mean, this, like I say,
on. Anders here. I think we should kick him if he refuses to say shit.
Yeah, he's more of a voyeur. But I think that you look at Darwin's come in now. Give his twopence idea. To go back to the point is that, you know, what religious people mean by evil is sin. What normal human beings mean by evil is suffering. The two things barely overlap. Eating shellfish and cutting the hair at your temples will send you to hell because it's a sin. Do you know what I mean? Slavery causes immense amounts of suffering, but isn't a sin.
Well, I mean, I don't think.
So when they say, the problem of evil is solved by free will and all this sort of thing, well, free will is, you know, we're not talking about the same thing. So, you know, and when we lament evil, when we go, there's suffering everywhere. Look at this child starving to death, you know, because its mother has died of HIV. You know, the religious people are clapping their hands gleefully saying, well, that's God's retribution for gays getting married in the Netherlands or something like that. Do you know what I mean? That isn't, what they're saying is, you know, dying children and HIV and Ebola aren't things to lament. Then just because they cause suffering, they're not evil. There's not evil in the world when these things happen. It's the expression of an all-loving God.
Well, the thing is, you'll notice that like even the theistic morality isn't completely divorced from suffering. Like it does have something to do with people. Like it seems to be about the relationship between people and the deity. Like it doesn't really make sense because like you go, well, why is that good? And like for them, it's kind of like asking why is suffering bad to the atheist or to sort of like a utilitarian atheist like we seem to do.
Yeah, but this is the point though, isn't it? Because what we call suffering and what they call sin are two different things. And you can't say, well, why is suffering bad or why is sin bad? You know, if you start allowing suffering into the equation of what is sin, you know, I think it's got to be, their view of it has to be that it's entirely coincidental if there is any overlap between sin and suffering. Do you know what I mean? Because they claim there's an objective moral standard. So whether or not those behaviors cause suffering or not, you know, there might be sinful behaviors which have no practical disbenefit and huge, massive, and causes masses of suffering, but they ought to still do them anyway because that's what that's what God wants. Do you see?
Yeah. So I mean, I think an interesting question is why do they come to that?
that conclusion.
Yeah.
Well, I think you have to go like that, because otherwise you're left with, well, when you say it's when something's objectively immoral, when something's objectively wrong, why is it objectively wrong? And their answer must be because the Bible says it's objectively wrong. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
If they say, well, it causes suffering, well, no, all you're doing there is, just using the word objectively wrong to mean suffering and things that cause.
Oh, Anders said his microphone won't work. I thought he was trolling me because I posted in the group, like, don't come and just sit there and don't say anything. So I thought he was doing that to piss me off.
Well, he can. His microphone won't work. Can't work. Won't work. Microphone benefit sheets.
But I mean, maybe like if you want to believe in God and you want to believe that God is the sort of the foundation of goodness, then maybe you have to believe something like that, because you're stuck with having to explain away an immense amount of suffering. You probably believe that like abortion is bad, and that you're sort of like the way God designed you. Sort of like has implications for what we do with ourselves.
Yeah, because what they, like things like abortion and all that sort of thing, their answer can only ever be because God says so. Do you know what I mean? And it's got nothing to do with suffering or what normal people would say is evil deeds committed by people.
Well, I mean, so
it's just what God says. Otherwise, otherwise, they're being forced down the road of. Well, we know things are evil because people don't like it. You go to hit a spider and it'll run away because it wants to continue living. Do you know what I mean? Every animal on Earth, aside from, your common garden Christian, is repelled by suffering, and even the most lowly insect has probably a more sense of empathy. That's what drives us, isn't it? We see suffering, we think, oh God, that hurts. You look at people's brains when you show them somebody falling over, and you experience increased blood flow to the areas of the brain that you would had you fallen over. We have evolved a sense of empathy. That's entirely coincidental to what
it seems that the Christians sort of like it might be a coping mechanism to sort of deny the real wrongness of suffering, but it also I think like that what you seem to be getting at is that like moral conversations, there's a problem of having moral conversations with people who believe that, because their morality is so distorted and removed from what we would call morality. When we both talk about morality, we're talking about just there's virtually no overlap whatsoever.
Yeah, because we wouldn't agree with why they think something is wrong or why they think something is right.
Well, I mean, that's why I made Christian arguments for sodomy, to sort of say, well, okay, so I could say, the liberal framework, but then really the Christian framework, it isn't one thing. Like, there's lots of ways to think you have a Christian framework. So I just said, look, like if we're going to talk about making a bunch of shit up, then here's one way you could do it, and gay anal is it's completely okay.
Yeah.
So I think it's useful for rats to say, look, if you don't believe in God, then we can't have a moral conversation. Our having a moral conversation presupposes that you believe in God and objectivity and the rest. Whereas I say no, like I could argue for my conclusions based on your framework. And
exactly.
when I do that, there's some trolling involved. Definitely.
Yeah, obviously. Yeah, and people will be able to tell that I'm being quite trolly at the moment. But the point of what I'm saying is that when they start with the question, why is there suffering in the world, and then they flip and turn to talk about sin and free will. They're two very different, they're two entirely different things. And when they're talking about what's objectively right and objectively wrong, biblical morality, it has nothing to do with good order on earth, the general happiness of people. It pays no respect to whether or not these rules cause misery or happiness. I think it's absolutely right for the normal human beings to say you pursuing this definition, these set of policies, if we avoid the word morality completely,
Right.
and just boil it down to, you believe that people should live in one way, okay? Normal people believe or other people believe you should live in another way. How should we decide between those two systems? One causes a tremendous amount of suffering. The other is based on not causing suffering. It can be assumed, I think reasonably, that people don't want to suffer. Therefore, the only system that allows for both systems to occur, so if you want to live by biblical law, is a secular thing based on the harm principle. Because religion doesn't talk about suffering. Religion doesn't talk about misery. It doesn't talk about making life better for people. It only talks about the afterworld and shoveling money into the religious apologist sponsorship pages and shit like that.
Now, is that really true? I mean, I definitely see the point, but maybe the religious person's morality is a bit more ambiguous than, so there are elements where concerns about suffering do creep in.
Yeah, but their answer to suffering is God works in mysterious ways.
Well, I mean,
isn't it? They're not out to make life better for anybody. They're out so that they score enough brownie points to get a mansion in heaven, or whatever Jesus promises. I don't,
that's kind of the psychological reasoning behind being good for the Christian is to get to heaven, and I'm sure a Christian would go well, no, it's more to do with sort of like a smart Christian. Let's say there's such a thing.
Yeah.
Let's say Epicurus was on it. I don't know, but if I was going to try and defend this, I'd say it's more about righting the past wrongs than sort of a motivation to be good, because
But what's a past wrong? The only wrong that matters is whether or not you wrong God. It doesn't matter whether you wrong another human being.
There's a whole spectrum of people, from the gullible idiot supporting someone what's his face, Joel Osteen, and then some liberal guys. There are people in between who they have elements of both, and I think that might be interesting. You know what I mean? Whereas they're kind of fundies, but they're sort of not too dense. I'm gonna get some coffee.
Yeah, I mean, can you hear me still?
Yeah, I can hear.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what a lot of people do is, as with all these things, try to adapt the religion to suit their lives.
Right.
To adapt each policy to say, well, God didn't really mean to allow, to give advice on being a good slave. God didn't really mean, that, women have no rights. God didn't really mean all these things. That's just evil people, evil, wrong sinners reading the Word of God and then just following it without feeling the Word of God. Do you know what I mean? It's this bizarre circular nonsense. But it's always never to do with the suffering that's involved. It isn't, they sleep slightly nicer in bed when one of them have a fucking revelation, and decide, oh Christ, that socially unacceptable policy about us not allowing any black people to hold a position higher than deacon. Guess what? Jesus came down last night and he said it was fine. So just, 10 years after the civil rights movement in America, now we the Mormons, Jesus has told us, we're the moral leaders in this. We need to be the last organization that's not racist. So it's nice for them, for the adherents, to say, Christ, we're not as completely socially unacceptable and generating suffering at a rate of knots.
William Lane Craig says, we're not God's pets. But I guess when you believe that all of this is sort of a transitional period, and that there's an infinite time of raving in heaven or sort of having a Mars bar permanently in your mouth.
Yeah.
Then I don't know. It would be good if we got a theist on here to say, how much does your moral system take suffering into account? And should it be different?
I'd say Anders just said they aren't consequentialists, but that doesn't mean they don't care about suffering. Which, of course they don't. Of course they care about suffering. They're human beings. They're evolved apes. We're one of the most social species on the planet. There is no possible, only somebody like a psychopath can have immunity to the suffering of others. The point is that when they're talking about, evil and God's view of people's actions, it isn't anything to do with whether or not it causes harm. So when,
Well, it doesn't have to be, though. They're not utilitarian.
Oh, microphone's working.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I mean, they reject utilitarianism and they have arguments against that. Like William Lane Craig is constantly arguing against that view. But it's not like you said where there's no overlap there, because clearly, I mean, when you go to heaven, there's a reason why you don't get tortured in heaven. I mean, so they do care about consequences somewhat.
I think
it's not completely
tortuous.
How do you figure that?
Well, one, if you believe there's free will, there's no free will in heaven. You have no freedom to sin in heaven because there's no sin in heaven. Yeah? The only pleasure in life is watching other people being tortured or praising Jesus, by all accounts. Both of which sounds awful to me.
Okay, well, yeah, both of those would be terrible. I don't know that you'd be watching that happening, though. And so, yeah, you wouldn't...
Tertullian said that one of the many pleasures of heaven was watching what happens to people who go to hell.
Well, he was a psychopath, but anyway. You'd have to be that.
But doesn't this mean you just watch people being separated from God? It looks kind of boring. It's not like Cannibal Holocaust or so.
Well, this all just highlights how ill-defined the whole religion is. But there is, and I say, there is an overlap between suffering and sin. The point which you say they're not consequentialists, and what I say, anyway, is that the slight overlap, that there is between suffering and sin is entirely consequential. In that, if you found out there was a sin that caused no suffering, it wouldn't stop being a sin. And if you found something, that caused a massive amount of suffering, it doesn't mean that it's a sin.
Well, yeah, that's true.
Yeah, so it's entirely consequential, and correlation does not imply causality. So,
well, doesn't it depend on what you think like the theistic ethic is trying to do? Because so like if you think that if it was trying to explain away suffering, then you would sort of understand why you would need. So like if you sort of you have to explain away suffering, and then you sort of have to. Okay, well, why is there suffering then? Oh, well, it's all for the good, which means that sort of like you're constrained by what's happening around you. So I don't know. I basically I'm getting it like it isn't really it isn't really that like it is a concern of suffering.
My point is that it isn't an answer to the problem of suffering. Religion has nothing to say.
Well, there are distinct answers. There are distinct answers. One, the answer that you're giving is that suffering isn't a problem, but there are other answers which say suffering is a problem, but here's a solution. And the answer that like the sort of oh well, we're not God's pets is probably one of the worst answers.
Yeah, it is. I mean, and it explains it. Very few pets do things in order to cause suffering to other people. Religionists do things that have no other real world benefit than to cause suffering to other people, and I'm guessing that's something that they find praiseworthy. The reason I'm going on about this is it isn't. There is when you talk to a theist about objective morality, they're not talking about the same thing. What we see as a problem, which is the suffering, and the forces of misery in the world, are completely uninteresting to people who say, oh, there's an objective morality, there's all this, that, and the other. They don't want to see real-world problems solved because they see those problems as being opportunities to test their faith, to test their unerring belief in Super Sky Wizard or whatever it is.
I don't think it's that. I don't think it's that they don't want to see problems solved. I think they do. I just think that they want a good fallback for when they don't.
For when they
get
don't
them solved.
Well, there's lots of real world problems that they don't want to see solved.
Right. No, but there are things that they don't accept as problems, like
HPV. The cervical cancer. The vast majority of Christians in your country, Joel, your adopted country, have previously backed their politicians who voted against funding HPV vaccines because they said, well, if we vaccinate girls against the HPV vaccine, then how will they know that having sex out of, being promiscuous is evil and sinful? Do you know what I mean? Without them catching cervical cancer. Do you know what I mean? They actively pursue things which they think are, whatever their word is for the opposite of sin. Some good brownie point scoring thing. Yeah, even though it will cause suffering, because the imperative is to score brownie points with Jesus. It isn't anything to do with suffering. Which is why, from a humanistic point of view, religion is a source of suffering and evil.
It would be interesting if we sort of had better numbers about who supports precisely what.
No, of course, I'm exaggerating. Do you know what I mean?
The Republican Party is a joke and it's like abysmal and it's supported by way too many people, like millions of fucking just credulous idiots who buy the, so like it's not like you're talking about a false problem, but like it would be. I wonder if a lot of people support them for like certain reasons that don't really have anything to do with those, like cervical cancer and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the way they make laws in America as well. You can have a law about subject A, and then a completely dissociated rider on it. And that then gets through, and your constituents might say, I really want you to support this law. I really want to make sure that happens. And in part of the sort of mealy-mouthed concessions that they make in order to get the main law passed, there might be some negative consequences to that. So I don't think that you can, with the American system, I don't think that you can blame the voter for the mechanics of Washington, because the mechanics of Washington are largely unchangeable, it seems to me. So, but I mean, I think my point is still set. I mean, what they're claiming as an objective set of rules, set of policies by which to live, doesn't have anything to do with how people should live together. What the majority will talk about when they're talking about morals, they'll say, well, it's about how to live a good life. How to get on with each other, how to be nice to one another, how to leave the world better than you found it, how to stop people thinking, the world would be better without you in it. It would be a nicer, sweeter, more lovely place without certain individuals in it. But of course, from their point of view, those are all irrelevant questions. The only germane question is, will it get me into? Will it please God, or does it annoy what I think God is? So you're dealing with a billion different interpretations of how they feel about certain subjects as being the actual true message of Jesus into their open heart centers. Where it contradicts the Bible, but meh. He didn't really mean that. It's just an allegory, which is why it doesn't make any sense.
The other interesting thing is that they're willing to adopt the actual content of their morality, and which is based on suffering, because like there are things in the Bible which, if implemented, in a literal way would be unworkable. So they get around that somehow, but yet they retain this stuff which doesn't. So it's weird.
Yeah, and this is where you get conflicts between Christian morality and liberal democracy, because the liberal democracies, if they're based, when they're based on English common law, which the American legal system is entirely based on English common law, and the English judicial system, the English law is based on principles of equity and the harm principle. They've been the biggest influences to both criminal and tort law. And so where those are concerned with equality, equitable outcomes, fairness, and where they're in contract law and in criminal law where it's based on harm, the degree of harm, an intent to cause harm, things like that, you're going to start coming up against a system of policies which, because they have no care for equity, because they have no care for harm, or I should say, because the care about is merely coincidental, you're going to have certain of those policies which do cause harm to other people. So where you have people, where you've got a policy of we must prevent at all cost to consenting mammals doing X in bed, people would say that's causing harm to stop them doing what they want, because you have no right to infringe their rights. You have no authority to stop them doing that. So you get these conflicts between the religious set of policies and the politics and things like that. And where our response would be to talk about harm. Does it cause harm?
Why do you think then that sort of like the in America at least, like the gay marriage thing is going through? So that seems that it's utilitarianism that's winning that.
Well, because the system is utilitarian, isn't it? It's based on the Constitution. I mean,
there's so much things where it's like someone is, it's like a slogan practically, like, "Get out of my vagina," because they sort of the Republican right sort of like routinely come up with these insane laws about sex, not just to do with gays. So I think it is a contest. I don't think it's like.
No, I mean, it's got to be challenged in a court, and that takes a long time. So you can have, one of the most harmful, dangerous laws that cause suffering that's, very common across America is abstinence-only style sex education. Do you know what I mean? Now, the problem there is, of course, you've got a legal system that doesn't like positivism. Do you know what I mean? You can always object to somebody saying, well, I've got to teach these kids this because it's a health issue. If these kids just go out and leave school and think that abstinence is a viable sexual lifestyle, it isn't. There's nothing they can do to, get them drunk, put them in a room with somebody they find sexually attractive and who finds them sexually attractive. The hormones will take over. And there's nothing they'll be able to, and remembering some screaming 40-year-old virgin telling them not to have sex at school, it's not going to work. It's not how the brain works. It's not how a species survives. What you've got to do is teach them, how to have safe sex, because they're going to have sex. The assumption that they're not going to have sex is so ill-informed. But of course, the thing is, you're then coming up against, well, we want to teach children this. And the legal system says, well, there's right to force your, however well-informed opinions on others. And they believe, I assume, that this gives more protection than, a more scientific approach.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? So there is this tension, but when it comes to stopping an individual doing what an individual wants to do, then that reason for stopping them has to have a secular purpose. I mean, that comes from the, that bleeds through the Constitution and all the federal laws that there are. You've got to have a secular purpose, and religious people don't, and that's why all of these marriage, without exception, all of these marriage bans have been overturned on appeal, which is why the Supreme Court hasn't needed to get involved, because there's no contradiction in the law. Do you know what I mean?
But I mean, why is that going through? And then there's, the abstinence-only stuff is like still seems to be fairly prevalent.
Well, because it's not, it's factually accurate to say if you don't have sex, you won't catch it. HIV. You can't. It's very unlikely.
Yeah, but it's actually inaccurate to say that it's feasible.
It's effective at stopping. Yeah, it's factually inaccurate to say it's effective.
No, but I mean, it just won't happen. Like, we know that, like, we can model human behavior, and that those models say that the predictions based on abstinence
and you can point to states and areas that have abstinence-only policies, and the prevalence of sexually transmitted diseases is much greater, and people have died. Young boys and girls have died in order that the lawmakers score some more points with the Sky Wizard. Which is horrific. And if you were saying, right, well, what do we do? But if it was any other health issue, if it was picking noses or putting things in ears or drugs, then they'd be all over it, and you'd have a clamp down debate, telling people the correct way to avoid dying from a drug overdose and things like that, as I'm sure happens in American schools. But because it involves sex, and sex is something that Jesus cares about, so much so that he never had it, apparently. And who better to advise on sex than a 2,000-year-old virgin? And his followers and people with dirty imaginations. And that's what's happening. It's because I don't think people want to equate sex with religion, but they're so intertwined. And, Christianity in particular is obsessed with sex to a ridiculous degree. And that's what, if you talk about sex, you're talking about religion in America.
Right.
And they all get so, basically, I think you've got a system that gets in the way of a lot of things, but would you change it? Yeah, you have to endure the death of your children at school from people shooting guns. But hey, that's what you should expect from a 250-year-old constitution that's supposedly going to still work for you in 2,000 years time or something.
There's also the problem of like secularism being eroded in England too.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's these faith schools, and
but the thing is,
everyone has a right to their own opinion. Nonsense.
Yeah, but the thing about England is that nobody can turn around to you and say, but that's what our country's founded on, and that have any legal standing whatsoever. Yeah, here you'll have people say, well, the tradition is that we just don't talk about sex because.
No, but people will say it's a Christian nation.
Yeah, and historically, the people who have been most in charge and have had most influence have been very devout Christians. So it's not surprising that there's it's a Christian country in the senses of the origins of culture and things like that. But that's no argument. It might be an argument in America to say, it's explicitly not a Christian country in the Constitution, but imagine that it were, and you could say, well, the Constitution says X, so how we've always done it and how it was done in the past has a legal standing in America. How we've always done it in Britain has no legal standing. It's not an argument to say this is how we've always done it, therefore it's the right way to solve the problems of today. And the role of every office, every political office, every institution has evolved and changed, tremendously over the years.
Well, I mean, it's
Because
apparently worked because there's still this sort of like, this faith stuff in Britain. I mean, so like these arguments do have some tenacity, I guess.
But only on a numbers basis. Only because there's a lot of Christians in the House of Commons. There's a lot of Christians in the House of Lords. They're going to be.
Yeah, but there's a lot of Christians in the House of Lords because secularism isn't properly instantiated.
Yeah, but I mean, I think rather than change that, I think you'd have to think really hard about what you're giving up control of. By ejecting the bishops, and separating church from state in the UK, I think you're far more bound. You've just created a new front and a new, different source of authority that people will recognise as being authoritative. I mean, the Church of England is very, very different to the religions in America. But by keeping it within government, then, you can change. I think it's 1858 or something. Parliament voted to say that you didn't have to believe in hell to be a member of the Church of England. All the bishops voted against it. But Parliament changed doctrine. That's probably a good thing. Because if you want to be the established church, it has many perks, but it comes with a responsibility to the state. So there are huge benefits to not having a separation between church and state in terms of achieving things, but also including these people in the whole process of government, so that you don't get people in pulpits screaming at the 4 people that bother to go to church anymore in this country. And you've seen in this country a far more managed removal of religion from government by including them in it, than you have in America, where you've just got they have such a disproportionate influence. And they're completely, they're allegedly separate from the state. So if you look at it from a point of view of, well, what's it actually achieved? What is the, if you look at it from a utilitarian point of view, which is the better system? Well, if you want religion to be more powerful, separate it from the state.
Well, I mean, that's not. It's not all. I mean, you look at Scandinavia, which is secular. They don't have any of these issues.
No, I mean, they also have incredibly good education, and only 5 million people per country, or whatever it is. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
They're very they're a very progressive group of people. Britain is, to a certain extent, hampered by that sense of tradition and the sheer numbers of it, and the sense of purpose. I mean, we've had crises in the past, and we've dealt with it by sort of knuckling down and saying, let's remember what we're all about, And this sense of Britishness has become such a caricature of itself that it's kind of almost got in the way, and and now UKIP are using it, and Britain First, and all these other quack organisations, and it's now, to most, to a lot of British people, you feel that pang of feel slightly uncomfortable when I see somebody waving the flag, and we've always used that as the unifying thing amongst us. You look at Germany, which is again another quite progressive country. That's had unifying crises in its past that it's overcome with progressive politics. And William WLC there looking quite lovely. Is a magnificent specimen.
I'm Lars.
The greatest scholar is here.
Yeah, the greatest scholar in the world.
Teaches cosmology.
Mr. William Lane Craig. no relation to William Craig, accused of rape, but used the defence of "I'm gay" to avoid being. And you can Google that. Yeah, so I mean, allowing the church, and also the chief rabbi, and also the head of the League of Muslims, or whatever they're called, into the government process, on the understanding that it is a secular process, allows for their concerns to be addressed early, for relationships to be built, for a quid pro quo on letting certain things in order to get other things established. Neither system is perfect, but I think the way it is in America, where they just sort of stand on the outskirts and throw pebbles into government's pond, and have unmonitored influence.
Yeah, but why is it unmonitored? That's the thing.
Because you can't. Because who is the state to monitor what churches do? That's what the war between church and state means.
No, but I mean the problem is that religious arguments have traction in the sort of political arena, if you will. Like people can say God and not get laughed at. Like that, British politicians have never been able to do that.
No, and good. Do you know what I mean? I mean, it is a good precedent that, is. I mean, we probably have more of a history of critical thinking and satire than America. I mean, our satire is vicious. It's not like Fox News chuckling away because they've just lying because they don't understand satire. Our satire is absolutely visceral, and if you have you have somebody who has to resort to things like God or patriotism to justify things, we have the mantra of patriotism is the last refuge of the scoundrel. And what Johnson meant by that was that if you can't justify things reasonably, a bad arguer will go to, let's just do it for God. Let's just do it for country. We can't justify it any other way, so how about God and country?
What's kind of funny is last night I watched some, what's it called? You probably know.
Hello?
Hello?
Yeah, go on. I didn't hear it.
Sorry, it's like something Palm. It's something that the BBC broadcasts, and it's like this thing where everybody flies around the Union Jack. You really don't know what I'm talking about?
Oh, the prom.
Prom.
Proms.
Okay.
Last night the prom. Yeah. Yeah, it's in the old Royal Albert Hall. It's a music festival.
Last
night of the proms, they play Land of Hope and Glory, and that's when people start waving their flags. It's basically.
Yeah, it's really fucking pathetic.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. The proms are excellent. I mean, don't let the last night of the proms colour your view of the prom. The last night of the proms like a village fete. It's that kind of quality, but the rest of the proms are excellent. Especially the.
Yeah, it's all classical music and shit, right?
Yeah.
Fucking Beethoven and people like that.
Doctor Who. There's a Doctor Who prom, which is awesome.
Oh, okay.
Really excellent. It is. Yeah, so, but overt patriotism, I think, is distasteful. And, people are naturally... Well, there's parts of... Because what they tend to do is hitch patriotism to some terrible idea. And they say, well, it's patriotic to hate foreigners. Therefore, if you don't hate foreigners, you're not British. That kind of argument's quite big in America, isn't it? They say, here's a terrible idea. If you're not
You're
against
American if you don't like tax cuts.
Exactly, yeah. If you don't like this idea, you're un-American. And who wants to be un-American? You know, and they do that, and people are convinced by it. They don't point and laugh at it. They don't go, baking powder? That's a terrible argument. That isn't an argument at all. That's just ridiculous. You know, they don't do that. They don't go, this is stupid, because it's socially unacceptable to say. It's not socially unacceptable to go, Britain is a shithole. Do you know what I mean? It's not socially acceptable to say Britain's terrible. We all thought, we all joked about how great and, you know, being positive about the 2013 London Olympics. Which is hilariously funny because it was the 2012 London Olympics. But of course we all joked, or the 2013, you know, to show that we can never deliver things on time.
Oh, okay, I get it now.
It was very funny at the time. But yeah, I mean, there's a natural self-deprecating view of it, but also an expectation that things are going to get better. It's a positive, you know, I would say it's an optimistic society. It's getting less and less optimistic, I have to say. You know, we're seeing a lot of the American, and when I say American, I don't mean Americans. I mean the political system in America has this big corporate influence upon it, and is using certain arguments and doing certain things. That culture is coming across to the UK. You know, I think, and it is a more, you know, pushy, more stubborn religious influence. You know, you don't have the same embarrassment of people like UKIP that you used to.
Right.
You know,
I don't know.
I don't know. But in any case, the answer to life's problems cannot be found, and were never intended to be found, within the objective morality of the Bible.
No,
you clearly haven't heard William Lane Craig's divine command theory.
What's the divine command theory? Is it feeling something in your heart center?
Well, Jarl could say it more eloquently, but it's essentially that. God damn it! I seriously just forgot. I just got back from
basically what Darren has
school.
been criticizing the entire video.
Has Craig ever solved any real-world problem with this divine command theory?
No, they're not about. Religion is not about solving problems. That is why religion is so anti-science.
No,
Science
I
is
think it's about
solving
enduring problems.
Yeah. Accepting problems because they're there for some other, as yet unknown purpose. But it's best to just assume it's a purpose and save yourself some money.
Right.
You know, and the problem is that it's this, like we were talking about last time, this anti-science influence that pervades everything. Where, you know, you go, well, you know, the less information that anybody is given, with a bit of conspiracy theory dust thrown on it, and they're all against vaccines, you know, where there's no evidence of anything bad happening from vaccines, you know, and only one bad study years ago, embarrassingly from Britain, linking MMR to autism, which was discredited and totally disproved. It was incorrect, it was wrong, you know, and suddenly there's this anti-vaxxer movement. Dump all of the evidence for climate change, and they're bloody attaching coal-burning fume towers to their cars. You know what I mean? It's like that, how dare you tell me how to live my life?
Yeah,
how dare you try to solve a problem?
Yeah, well, it's more than a religious thing, because, I mean, the largest the thing is, the largest demographic of people in the U.S. who are, you know, who don't vaccinate their kids are upper middle class white people who live in San Francisco.
Really? I mean, that would seem.
Well, not, but you know, the West Coast. Yeah, liberals have West Coast liberals kind of have a slight average on being, you know, more anti-vax.
Morons, aren't they?
They are morons. I mean, to me, it's completely moronic to risk your child's life.
But it's not just not just liberals, though. There are a lot of conservatives that are anti-vaxxers.
If you imagine that, like, sort of some liberals sort of rejected Christianity, and now they're sort of they didn't gain 50 IQ points from it. Like, you can see how they would go to this anti-vaxxer stuff, because there's this sort of notion that, like, the big pharma and that, like, we've sinned against nature and all this other crap, which could very well function like a religion. There are people I know who, like, aren't Christians, but, like, think in that way, but, like, it's just sort of more pantheistic.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, yeah, that's kind of how it goes. You go from being, you know, I guess I could go from my perspective, but it's probably for a lot of people. You go from being, you know, fairly religious to then as you lose it, you kind of become more spiritual, and a lot of people kind of stop there, where they'll be like, oh, okay, so there isn't God, but you know, magical morphic resonance and crystals. Yeah. They'll go to more to that because that's more of a...
Yeah, because it allows them to get in on the rituals and the... Sorry.
Yeah, but we're about, you know, that absolute, you know, strictness and... So, you know, they're usually well-meaning people, but sometimes they're... In ways, a lot of them could actually become even crazier. Because, you know, this whole idealist thing is actually kind of very similar to, you know, spirit science. If you
only far less evidence for it. Not that there's anything evidential about spirit science. But I mean, to a certain degree, you know, other than a want to protect people from being scammed, I don't really care that much. You know, it's unlikely that crystal healers are going to take over the Department of Health.
The problem is that there's just a profound disrespect for truth, so that, you know, homeopathy had millions of pounds spent on it.
Quite, yeah. I mean, Britain is no utopia. The NHS still funds homeopathy, which is...
That's insane. Like, you might as well just throw money at people. Yeah. Like, literally, use money as a weapon and throw it at people.
Yeah.
It would accomplish more.
Yeah. No, and that sort of thing is completely bizarre. I think you could argue for the psychological benefits of longer consultations and the level of attention, and because it has no, you know, because it has no impact or effect. I mean, if you try to explain how a drug works or how a vaccine works to somebody, they have, you know, there are many people who would have a hard time understanding it. You know, you don't need to understand it to take it, but they feel as though they want to understand it, and because they don't understand it, they're against it. I don't understand it, therefore I don't like it, Leanne. But homeopathy, for example, on the other hand, is quite understandable in the sense of it just says, well, we think about what caused your imbalance of the humours, so then we give you, you know, you've been bitten by a snake, therefore we make a homeopathic solution with a bit of snake venom in, and your body reacts to that, and you know, it takes a memory shot of it, and and they use venoms to make anti-venoms, don't you know, and they feel like they understand it, and because it's, you know, no one ever dies from homeopathic overdoses.
Unless they drown.
Unless they drown, you know. You know, they will say, well, it's quite harmless. And anyway, you know, they're taking sugar pills, and that's just placebos anyway. So there's a, you know, placebo effect. And there's a strong argument, I think, to measure the success of a lot of pharmaceutical companies' products against homeopathic medicines, because they tend not to test against the placebo. All they do is go, is this better than the last product? Regardless of whether or not it's worse than the placebo or not, and then they say...
I think there's an element of the Platonic lie in that argument, which I don't like. It would be just better if we were just brutally honest with ourselves.
Well, I mean, the thing is, I mean, there is an argument in terms of your own, you know, the healing benefits of morale and the health risks of depression. You know, if people who are, you know, if you're people who are depressed or run down or things like that will, you know, their healing rate will reduce. You know, then there is, as you say, that sort of noble eye of, well, whatever you can do to raise their morale will be good for their health, regardless of the truth of it. I mean, what do you think of that?
I mean, no, the point of what you should be doing is curing the depression, which you can do with lots of drugs.
No, I'm not talking about clinical depression. I just, just sort of feeling run down, feeling down. Not clinical depression, just miserable and things, compared to, thinking, well, I've got something to look forward to, this is going to be great, I'm doing something, I'm taking control, and all that sort of thing. The placebo effect is a real effect. But it only works if you lie to them.
No, that's not true, actually, is it? Like, you can have a placebo effect where people know it's a placebo and then
well, I'm not sure that's
it works
a placebo
anyway.
effect.
No, I mean, it sounds like it's not much of a placebo effect if they believe the lie, but like it.
I think they might suspect that it's a placebo, and I don't know about it. But I mean, the commonly understood placebo effect, let's say, when they used to do it with GPs, oh yes, here you go, madam, a hypochondriac. Here you go, here's some, I mean, this is sort of meta placebo effect. Here you go, Mrs. Hypochondriac, here's your incredibly strong pills for your hypochondria. You'll be cured. Relies on her not having a full understanding of hypochondria, and things like that. There's things that are good for the body to sort of prevent needless worry, needless anxiety, because you worry about things and you could say, well, is it true that these things are worth worrying about? I don't know. I don't know whether I'm for it or against it.
Well, I mean, religion is one of those things that says, like, okay, we'll believe nice things, and that will sort of help us mull through, sort of like endure the problems. But it's better to just solve the damn problems than.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, why not solve the problems? In religions, the best they can do nowadays is the vicars and the priests and things scour the Bible for the socially acceptable bits and repeat it to the congregations, ever fewer passages that are socially acceptable, to say, oh, look, religion isn't irrelevant, it isn't evil, it isn't horrible, it doesn't cause suffering.
Yeah, and the problem also is that it's so bland. Like, there's no real wisdom in there. There's no ethical insights. Philosophers are the people who make those.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is the thing. You can't even claim, people, the most religious of Christians, don't turn the other cheek when the towers come tumbling down. They don't react in the sort of Jesus way. What they do is they cherry pick from other parts of the Bible, and start plucking eyes out. And that's what they do because it allows them to lie to themselves to say they're being Christian, and rather than and then you have people trying to justify loving thine enemy or whatever. By bombing the shit out of their children.
Yeah.
Things that, and in America especially, there's almost a bloody mindedness of going, well, even though Jesus agreed with this, or even though Jesus actively recommended this course of action, discussion rather than bombing them, the liberals like it, therefore we must not do it. Do you know what I mean? It's that that anti-intellectual bloody mindedness. We've got to do everything we possibly can not to, to spoil what they want to do, regardless of whether or not it's good for us.
Yeah.
I think, because there's certain parts that, like I say, you search the Bible, no religious book can be all bad, and there are some good bits that, like turn the other cheek and love your enemy, and things like that. But first sign of trouble and they give it up because it's not a principle. Do you know what I mean? It isn't the product of reason.
I guess this kind of fits in with this and the patriotism thing, but I just posted. Well, I didn't post it yet, but there's this conservative commentator named Michael Savage. He's like this radio guy, and he just yesterday said that he thinks that veterans with PTSD are a bunch of losers. And this is a guy who supports the Iraq War, or at least supported Iraq. Well, I think he went against it later on, but
They're a bunch of losers.
yes.
I mean, that betrays such a,
Better. And then he says,
not an understanding of psychology and people.
Such an anti-intellectual, anti-human.
oh, and then he says, you need men like me to save this country. You need men to stand up and say, stop crying like a baby over everything. Men are so weak and so narcissistic. It's no wonder ISIS can defeat our military. These are, but see, these are the type
Has
of
there been
people
any engagement between ISIS and the US?
No.
No.
Like, no combat ground. Like, no combat, like, on the ground, but... Yeah, these are the people who are just, who will say, we love the troops, we're going to donate to them and all this, but then he's just going to attack them if they ever have any complaints about the war at all.
No, exactly. I mean, I don't think you can claim to support the troops whilst not supporting the individual members.
Like Rush Limbaugh calls, because, he was raised in that area where, Vietnam War, and he considered all the veterans who went against it to be, traitors, even though he never actually ever went into war. So
there's nothing wrong with people who haven't been to war criticizing or analyzing what the military do.
Well, yes, but
there is a, but I mean, that said, you have to accept that projecting force around the world, which is what both our countries do, has an enormous cost, both in terms of, most humans won't naturally kill each other. You have to train them to do it. And quite often that training isn't sufficient. And if you want to do that, if that's the country that you want, then you can only achieve it by supporting the troops and recognizing that however misguided the politicians are, the donkey politicians are, the people who are soldiers, who are being asked to do these things that you would not do, do make a sacrifice. Whether or not that sacrifice you agree with or not, I think you have to. You do yourself a disservice by criticizing people who have, no matter what the cause or the series of events that took them there, that end up with something like PTSD. To do anything other than support them is, completely repellent. Just like you would with any other person with any other mental, psychological condition. You say far more about, this guy has said far more about himself than he has anybody suffering from PTSD. And as Giles says, shown only a breathtaking. I'm having worked with the military for so many years. I mean, this guy is repellent, and I hope that you're tweeting him.
Well, not
he's an absolute twat.
Yes, but this guy is he's kind of known for being an anti-intellectual. Like he considers people with college degrees lesser humans because they don't work hard. They've never done anything. Unlike him, because this guy actually used to be I think he was a homeopath, not a homeopath, but like a naturopath or however you say it. Yeah, that. Both.
Yeah, he's got a proud history of scamming people. Well,
yes.
The thing is, your country, and it's it's much more less than it was. But it used to have a good link between hard work and economic and social progression. Yeah. So if you put effort in, you'd see benefits come out.
Well, how do you define hard work? I think that's the thing. Like, you'll hear the thing that anybody who works hard will become successful.
Well, no. If you do things for other people, there's an economic system in place that if you do things that benefit others, you're rewarded for it. Yeah. In a money beyond meeting the costs of doing that beneficial thing. And that's an economic system that's in place. It isn't the case that if you were born in sub-Saharan Africa, you could do all you want for other people, you're probably still going to starve to death. Do you know what I mean? There isn't a strong link between effort and sacrifice and reward. That said, there is a 2, maybe 3-tier system in America in the classes that they have. There's a certain group of people where that system is strongly maintained. So if you put effort in, you get rewards out. There's a sort of limited a ceiling on the lower class in America, the working class in America, where they get to a certain point, and no matter how much more effort they put in, you see a diminishing return. The amount you earn for your 60th working hour is not the same that you earn for your 40th working hour, if you know what I mean. Simply because the cost of childcare, the cost of logistics, the cost of oil and things like that. So there's places in the system where it works, and there's places in the system where it doesn't work. On the whole, America does work far better than other countries. I think it's still right to criticize that it doesn't work in the right way for the majority of, for a significant proportion of the country. But in terms of the benefit system, in terms of what the country is prepared to do for you, then it's fairly roughly equivalent to European nations.
I see 2 Tiki Vintos.
Yeah, they breed like rabbits. But and that system has not been free to establish. Yeah, people have sacrificed a lot. Soldiers, trades union members, socialists, conservatives, liberals. There's been a patch, a long history of sacrifice in the name of that country. So I don't think anybody is in a position to, especially if they're so stupid, to criticize anybody. You're supposed to be all helping each other, not trying to make yourself feel better by criticizing others, which is what this chap seems like he's doing. And is clearly a cunt. As well. You would agree with that, wouldn't you, Joel?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It would be interesting to
Go on.
get a based on and talk about, the relation they think exists between suffering and morality.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you look on Adolf's page, Ratz's page, the Ratzy, he's got his own little sort of sixth form debating society-esque essay on objective morality, where he goes, it all breaks down to, choosing a standard, which is just subjective, and then he goes on to choose a standard, which he uses Kant's thing about at the same time wishing for, wishing something to be universal. Don't support a rule that you can't at the same time wish to be applied universally.
Kant's retarded.
Yeah, and so he's chosen that as his standard for arguing things in and out. But I mean, you can't move anywhere from there. You still need other rules to reflect on, to say, well, if you hold to do this, you can't then, that's mutually exclusive from this position. Therefore, choosing this one proves that one's objectively bad. And it's just this confused mess. So I mean, if what would be useful is to have somebody who wasn't quite so confused about what they mean when they say morality, because I strongly suspect that it isn't suffering-based, it's sin-based, which has nothing to do, sin is about displeasing God, not how much human misery it causes.
I always think that when Vance thinks that you have to accept idealism first to understand morality, then he should argue better for idealism. it's kind of strange that Anders Smith is more interested in defining terms than Rats himself.
Yeah, exactly, because they rely on not defining terms. You know,
Exactly.
I mean, like I say, I listened to this audio podcast, The Good Atheist, with Jacob Fortin, who is Canadian, and he was playing this video from somebody who was talking about objective morality and free will, and the free will argument to why there's suffering in the world. You know, and it just occurred to me, well, that has the amount of suffering in the world has nothing to do with free will, and you know, it's not a problem. Free will is about sinning, you know, choosing to turn away from God, choosing to do things that
Did you
God
see the sort of like 26-minute treatise I did on this free will thing recently?
I did not. Was this your one with you narrating, or did you get somebody else to do it?
And I narrated it because I still don't have a mic. But basically I'm basically just saying, like, what do you even mean by free will? Like, before we can even...
Yeah. Because I think, right, and this, I'm asking this as a genuine question. If I could create, you know, you have to be able to recognize it in others, free will. This is the main problem with it, yeah? Because if I could program it, if I could make a robot, a black room, you know, a Chinese character room or whatever you want to call it, you know, that gave the same deviation from expected answers, from statistically expected answers, as a human, you know, would I have programmed free will? Would my program have free will? Because it looked indistinguishable from free will in others.
I don't think so.
Why?
Well, I mean, wouldn't be conscious, would it? I think.
Why does consciousness matter?
Why would it not?
Because you need a sensation of.
Why? This is
feeling stuff.
the thing. You can't. You know, if you can detect in others, you know, if you say, right, this is what, for you to define free will, yeah, means that, you know, you're attempting to understand it, and you're attempting to sort of say, well, I know this person has free will, or is it, I can only know I have free will? In which case, why recommend it as a discussion point for others? I suspect we don't have free will. I suspect it looks more like randomness, down-selected against your particular tastes, over which you have no control. And you can model that.
That's what I think too. But I mean, when you say free will, I mean, there's you mean like you want to model the free will that it appears we have.
Yeah.
Well.
And if I do it successfully, would that be sufficient for them to say, we clearly don't have free will? You know, if
the problem is like
that.
If you can model human decision making, I mean, Inspiring Philosophy in his video about Adam and Eve literally says back to back, this was a free choice, and then he answers the objection, well, why should the rest of humanity be punished? And he says, well, you can't say that you'd have done anything differently. And I think you can see the problem, which is it's tantamount to determinism.
I would do differently.
Yeah, and it's not. I mean, these, like I say, people like Rats and IP don't have, and Dresden don't really have a clear understanding of the majority of what they're talking about, and that's why it falls over so often.
No, but
they're always contradicting themselves.
When they're saying that, you can't say that you would have done differently. Well, no, I can't say I would have done differently. But if human beings have free will,
you wouldn't expect other people to be punished for my bad choices, would you?
No. The point is different. Is that like if humanity as a whole had free will, then you would expect that some people would do differently. So there are some people who have been punished unfairly. But if you can model human decision making to be that uniform, then it's not free.
But you also wouldn't say that sin is that you are responsible for your actions. This is what they want you to believe, isn't it? Your free will makes you responsible for your actions, not your children.
Right.
Sin is not hereditary, is it? You know, they propose no mechanism to show that that behavior is hereditary. It can be learned.
This is one of the interesting ambiguities in Christianity, I think, that they say it's free will, and yet they say that our nature, the sort of the way that we are, is sinful, innately sinful, and they just sort of go back and forth between these, and most people miss this. But there's never been sort of an answer for it. And why would God even create this libertarian free will, which is glitchy and always seems to screw up? When he could have been, like these Christians will say, oh well, you can't have a perfect existence, and then you go, oh, so what the hell is God doing? And then he just leaves it there.
I mean, to me, the more they go on about him, the more I think this God is a really bad scientist. You imagine a terrible, terrible scientist who sets up an experiment, right? Doesn't like the outcome, or the reality doesn't conform to his hypothesis, so he starts smashing up the experiment. Do you know what I mean? Puts rats in a maze. You're not doing what I thought you would. Drown them. Do you know what I mean? It's that kind of pathetic, babyish character that they're giving this character.
This is kind of why I'm a bit bored with counter apologetics, because you sort of you refute these arguments, these free will, sin stuff, and then they just
go, you didn't refute it.
Then they just make a video on something else, and then you just refute that, and then it's just
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is. I agree. I mean, to be honest, I prefer these sort of chats that we have, where I can talk about what I think and get it off my chest and form my, through people's objections and comments, form my opinion more correctly, as far as I'm concerned, so that I can be more reassure myself that I'm closing in on a better understanding of what I'm talking about, as opposed to the sort of transmit-only settings that these apologists have. And of course, they're there. Religion is a way that miserable people make more miserable people. So I suppose they like doing it because it makes them feel less alone. But I don't know.
I don't know. I've never really been religious. I never believed in anything spooky or stupid. I mean, so I have no idea.
Yeah, I have.
What the hell was wrong with you?
Yeah, I know. I mean, purely from a point of not really thinking about it.
Huh.
Because, as I say, you can grow up in the UK, have an almost exclusively scientific education, and of course, God never comes up in any of it. Do you know what I mean? You don't need to think about it. But your parents...
Reinhold, were you religious?
No.
Okay. Haunted Shore, were you religious?
I mean, he's
Mr.
only
Haunted.
14, isn't he?
Yeah. Say yes, you have been a creationist.
Yeah. I've never been a creationist. I mean, I would say I was C of E, if you know what I mean. Which is
no idea what this is.
Which is not like Church of England.
Church of England.
Yeah, sorry. Which is not like anything an American would recognise as being religion. Do you know what I mean? So if but I would, and I remember using the argument to my brother, who was an atheist before me, sort of saying, well, if it gives people comfort, it's far better to alleviate, probably what I'm saying about this bloody placebo thing again, it's far better to alleviate pain, in the immediate proximate pain of somebody grieving over the loss of a loved one, than it is to sort of shake them and go, how do you know there's a God? So that seemed to me very cruel. So, but that's as far as I kind of went to religion. I remember feeling I still like watching the sort of supernatural horror films. I do get quite jumpy with like ghosts jumping out and stuff like that. But
I like shaking old people and going, "Do you know you're going to die?"
Yeah, it's meaningless. Your husband's rotting. You want to see him again? You better start digging. No, but yeah, I think that you know, I do enjoy the sort of spookiness of ghost stories and things like that. And you enjoy them more when you have that ignorance protected. Yeah. So where you could, you know, if your understanding of science isn't strong, you know, and you don't understand things like conservation of energy, conservation of momentum, it's a lot easier to believe in things like ghosts.
There are philosophical problems with like things like Supernatural. There was one episode, my mum was watching it, and I just came downstairs to get some coffee, and like this angel appears, and she's looking for this devil dude, and the devil like hides behind the wall. Like can't an angel find the devil that's hiding behind the wall? Like, is this the problem?
No, I mean, I've never watched Supernatural, that program, but I remember watching things like Most Haunted and things.
Oh, Jesus Christ!
And being like, oh my God, imagine if this were real, sort of thing. And when they're, you know, really getting into it, just
Darren,
not really thinking about it.
Darren Taggart.
Get into it. But then trying to watch it when you've thought about it, it ruins it. Do you know what I mean? I mean, it's about suspension of disbelief. Oh, stop! Don't say that.
Oh.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would say that I've never been exceptionally religious in any sense that any of you lot would recognise as being religious.
I still recognize liberal religion as religion.
Yeah.
It's why I tend to sort of, when you say religious, I think he means conservative. He's talking about the conservatives.
No, I'm
Rather
not.
than say,
No, I've never been
You
conservative.
don't mean all Christians, because that gets really tiresome.
No, I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm somebody who didn't identify as atheist. You know, I remember saying to people, going, well, being atheist is just as ridiculous as being Christian. You know, just claiming that you know there is no God is just as correct as claiming to know that there is one. You know, I remember saying that, you know, arguing that at school. You know, and we had this debating society, and I did the worst kind of apologetic, still better than anything that they do today, but doing the traditional apologetics thing of the my combatant was saying, you know, there is no God and all this sort of thing, and I completely changed the definition of God, kept it changing, kept it moving about, to the point where the entire audience agreed with me.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and that's what they do, and it works. It really does work. Because
we should just get into apologetics and get Patreon accounts.
We should. We'd be bloody good. Honestly, it's so easy to be better than what they do. It really is. When you know what's wrong with the argument, you can defend against it. And the problem with the apologetics is they don't. Do you know what I mean? Because they never critically analyse anything they say. They're not interested whether they're right or wrong, because, as you say, they have no respect for the truth. Because they're not interested in that, or they believe, you know, being kind, they maybe believe that you can never know the truth, and that's why you need to be interested in it. It's so much easier if you do know what's wrong with these arguments, so that you can word things in such a way and do that sort of changing of definition. You know, it started off with him going, you know, oh, there's a big man in the cloud, you know, and I ended up with, you know, it's this strong sense of, you know, feeling bad when we do wrong, and those moments when we realise that what we've done has hurt somebody, and that pain we feel, you know, I think to many people that's the way God communicates with. And people are going. And it was that, you know, it was in things like that that I realised just how easy it is to be manipulated. Because I was doing it consciously,
Huh. Okay.
manipulate people, and from that, knowing that, you know, I wasn't among idiots, I wasn't among stupid people. I was among people who were, you know, as and probably a little bit more intelligent than me, and it was scarily easy, and that really scared me into thinking you need to have methods of protecting yourself from people who want to manipulate you, because they do exist.
Yeah. Good.
And
I think therefore manipulators exist.
yeah, and religious apologists are manipulating. I would like to think some of them, the ones who are successful, are doing it deliberately and know what they're doing. The ones who, you know, aren't really that successful, you know, like your IP and your Rats and your Dresd and stuff like that, they seem not to realise that they're quoting people who are intentionally manipulating them. And they don't recognise that, so they can't, you know, they don't tell, like Judge Judy says, you know, if you're a liar, you better have a good memory, because you've got to remember all the aspects, all the supporting lies that back up this, the manipulations and ways of wording things that back up this way of thinking. And of course they don't, because they think it's real. So yeah, so sorry to burst a lot of bubbles there.
Yeah, you have manipulated us now.
I've manipulated you
Now
all.
we
I'm
are
actually
so
Jesus.
angry. So angry at apologists.
Yeah.
We are so manipulated.
Exactly. Well, they do. Yeah, they do. I mean, you all recognise that that's what they're doing. You know, when you get applause or you get likes and things like that, you think, oh, I must do the same thing again. What was it that made it successful? You know, despite religion's influence, humans try to solve problems, you know, and try to satisfy needs. And when that need is for attention, you know, you make sacrifices against the truth. You know, now that's a natural thing. You either drive that into comedy or you become an apologist, you know, where they get attention and approval from people. By reassuring them that their faith isn't silly, by sounding, you know, like Hitler said, you've only got, you know, we need only sound reasonable, and that's what they do, and that's why they're all like Nazis.
Ratsies.
Ratsies, I should say. Sorry, Ratzi von Adolf Hitlerfucker. Hitlerfucker. So,
So that was fun.
That was fun. I thought we had a productive discussion.
Yeah, me too. We need to get some theists on this. The problem is there are only about 10 of them.
Yeah, that is the problem. And, well, I mean, I'd like to speak to your pal.
Okay.
Is it Epicurus?
Yeah.
Ezekiel or something?
Is he what?
Ezekiel. That sounds like a good name. So can you find a theist called Ezekiel?
UL.
Ezekiel. Yeah, I mean, I would happily extend any invitation to any theist who would like to talk about these issues. Doesn't have to be all of us. Can be any one of us. You know, if it's going to be particularly philosophical, you're probably better off debating with Jarl. If it's scientific, you'll probably annoy me too much, so you're probably better off debating with Jarl. But no, I mean, it's you know, I would say that if somebody does want to come on, I will happily agree. You know, we're all happy to agree rules of debate, that we don't get snippy and we don't, you know, just only resort to ad homs, although it is hard. You know, so long as you respect our appreciation and respect for truth and reality, rather than, we can only assume. I mean, it would certainly be good to get a. I know today I've presented an extreme view of a Christian's view on the correct way to live.
Right.
Okay. I absolutely accept that you cannot, only in psychopaths who are born that way and sociopaths who are, who are brought up that way, to have no sense of empathy, to have no care for the suffering of others.
No, I think it's an answer to the suffering problem by trying to say, well, this must be for the better.
Yeah, exactly. There must be some God benefit somewhere to balance out all this suffering. Just as Russell said, just as when you get a crate of a pile of crates of oranges and you get some bad oranges in the top one, it's absolutely reasonable to expect more good ones in the next one, because that's the way the universe works. The total number of good oranges must always equal the total number of bad oranges, because what kind of world would we live in where that weren't the case? But I mean, if somebody wants to come on and talk about the Christian view or the Muslim view of what's moral and how do they navigate those issues, be prepared to answer why you think any of us should care how you want to live your life and the impact on you of as others living as they please. But yeah, I mean, there's an open invitation. I think any of us would be more than happy to debate. Well, I think there's going to be a limit of, if we're talking about reality, your idea over here, there's going to be no basis for us to be able to discuss it. So if you are
Epicurus is pretty sensible, so he's not by any means. I don't think he's a divine command theorist. We'll have to see. I need to wrap up now. Darren.
Yeah.
I've got to bounce.
Oh, fine. Whatever.
Is he online?
Sorry?
Is he online?
Is who online?
Epicurus, he might be.
How long have we been doing this, Charles? About 2 hours again?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's probably right to wrap up now. But enchanting as ever, Joel.
See you guys later.
Yeah, I'll see you later. But thanks everyone else. So
Bye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.